She grew up in a small place where people rarely looked twice at her, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she had always learned to stay quiet. From a young age, she understood that speaking too much or dreaming out loud only brought questions she could not answer. Life had taught her early that survival meant blending in, not standing out. Her days followed the same pattern. Wake up before sunrise, prepare simple food, walk through narrow streets filled with noise, dust, and people rushing to places she had never been invited to. She worked in a building that looked grand from the outside. Tall doors, polished floors, soft lights that made everything seem important. To most people, it was a place of beauty and culture. To her, it was just work. She cleaned, ranged, and stayed out of the way. That was her role. No one asked her opinion. No one wondered what she felt. Most people did not even know her name. They only knew that when they arrived, the place was neat, and when they left, it stayed that way. She became part of the background, like a wall or a chair present, but unnoticed. Yet there was one thing inside that building that always pulled her attention. A piano. It stood in the main hall, black and shining under the lights. People treated it with respect. Some approached it with confidence, others with fear. She watched all of them from a distance. When someone played, she stopped what she was doing, even if only for a moment. Not long enough to be noticed, just long enough to listen. She had never been taught music properly. No lessons, no books, no teacher sitting beside her, correcting her hands. Everything she knew came from watching, listening, and remembering. Notes stayed in her mind the way stories stayed in other people's hearts. She remembered sounds, patterns, feelings, at night, after long days. She imagined the keys under her fingers. She moved her hands in the air, quietly, so no one would think she was strange. Music had entered her life by accident. Years ago, when she was much younger, there was an old keyboard in a neighbor's house. The keys were yellowed and some did not work, but when she pressed them, sound came out. Simple sound, but enough to change something inside her. She had gone there to help with chores. She left carrying something invisible but heavy, a love she did not know how to explain. From that day on, she listened more closely to the world, the rhythm of footsteps, the sound of rain on tin roofs, the rise and fall of voices. Music was everywhere, even where people believed there was none. She collected those sounds quietly, the way others collected memories. At the building where she worked, people laughed easily. They spoke loudly about concerts, famous performers, and training abroad. They wore clothes that looked expensive and carried confidence in their walk. She moved among them without being part of them. Some did not notice her at all. Others noticed her only when she was in the way. Sometimes, when she paused too long near the piano, someone would raise an eyebrow, a look that said she did not belong there. Once, a young man smiled in a way that did not feel kind and asked if she liked music. Before she could answer, he laughed and said, "Everyone does," then turned away. The laughter that followed stayed with her longer than it should have. She learned to hide her interest better after that. She cleaned faster, looked down more often, but no matter how careful she was, her eyes always found the piano. It was like gravity, strong and silent. There were days when famous players came to practice. People gathered around them, whispering, recording on their phones, admiring every move. She stood near the walls, holding a cloth or a broom, listening. She noticed small things others missed. When a hand hesitated, when a note was rushed, when emotion was missing even though the sound was perfect, she never judged them. She admired them. But deep inside, she felt something else too. A quiet ache. Not jealousy, not anger, just the knowledge that she understood more than people expected her to. At home, her life was simple. One small room, thin walls, old furniture. But at night, when everything was quiet, she sat near the window and let her thoughts play music for her. She imagined stages she had never seen and audiences she had never faced. Then she reminded herself that imagination was safer than hope. Hope had never been kind to her. People around her believed talent always came with proof, certificates, proper clothes, confidence. She had none of those. What she had was invisible, and invisible things were easy to ignore. One afternoon, while she was wiping the floor near the piano, a group of guests arrived earlier than expected. She froze, worried she was in the way. As she stepped back, her foot brushed against one of the piano pedals, making a soft sound. It was barely noticeable, but one woman looked at her sharply. "Careful," the woman said. "That's not for you." The words were calm, but they landed hard. She nodded quickly, apologized, and moved away. Her face burned, not from shame alone, but from the truth hidden inside those words. The piano was not for her. At least, that was what everyone believed. Still, she could not stop dreaming. There was something about music that made her feel equal to everyone else. When she listened, there were no labels, no uniforms, no background or class, just sound and feeling. In those moments, she felt seen, even if no one was looking. As days passed, small signs of tension began to appear. There was talk of an upcoming gathering, more people, more attention. The piano would be used. Important guests would attend. Everyone spoke about it with excitement. She listened silently, her heart beating faster each time the piano was mentioned. She did not know why, but she felt something building, a feeling she could not name, fear mixed with anticipation. Like standing near the edge of something deep, she told herself nothing would change. She would clean. She would listen. She would go home. Life would continue the way it always had. That was safer. But sometimes, life moves quietly toward a moment without asking permission. On the evening before the gathering, she stayed a little longer after work. The hall was empty. Lights dimmed. The piano stood alone. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine walking toward it, sitting down, touching the keys. Her hands trembled at the thought. She did not move. Instead, she turned away, locked the door behind her, and stepped into the night. She did not know that the next day, the same people who never saw her would finally be forced to look. And when they did, nothing would remain the same. The next day arrived faster than she expected. From the moment she woke up, there was a strange weight in her chest. Not pain, not fear exactly, but something restless. She pushed the feeling aside and went through her routine. Wash her face, tie her hair back, put on the same simple clothes she wore every day. Nothing about her looked different, yet she felt different inside. When she reached the building, it was already busier than usual. People moved quickly, carrying equipment, ranging chairs, checking lights. Voices echoed through the halls, laughter mixed with stress. The gathering everyone had been talking about was finally here. She took her place quietly and began working, wiping surfaces, straightening items, making sure nothing looked out of place. She kept her head down, but her ears stayed open. She heard words like special guests, important people, and talent. Each word made her heart beat a little faster. The piano had been cleaned until it shined. It sat at the center of the hall like it belonged there, like it owned the space. She avoided looking at it too long, afraid someone would notice the way her eyes softened every time they met it. As more people arrived, the mood changed. The hall filled with perfume, quiet conversations, and expectation. Some guests wore smiles that came easily. Others looked around with judgment, deciding what impressed them and what did not. She moved between them like a shadow. At one point, she overheard a small group talking near the piano. They were discussing past performances, laughing about mistakes others had made. One person joked about how anyone could press keys, but not everyone could make music. The group laughed. She felt her stomach tighten, but she said nothing. Soon, someone sat at the piano and began to play. The music was clean and practiced. People nodded politely. Some clapped softly when it ended. It was good, but it did not stay in the air for long. Conversations returned almost immediately. Another person played after that, then another, each one confident, trained, and sure of their place. She listened closely to all of them. She noticed the patterns, the safe choices, the lack of risk. Then something unexpected happened. Between performances, there was a pause. People shifted in their seats. Someone joked loudly about needing fresh air. Another voice suggested letting someone new try. A few eyes turned in her direction. At first, she thought it was an accident. Surely they were not looking at her. But then someone laughed and said, "Why not her?" Her heart dropped. She froze, holding a tray in her hands. The room felt suddenly smaller, hotter. Every sound grew louder. She felt dozens of eyes on her, curious, amused, doubtful. "Oh, come on," another voice said. "It'll be fun." Laughter followed. Not cruel, but not kind either. The kind of laughter that comes from not taking someone seriously. She shook her head quickly. "No," she said softly, almost whispering. "I can't." But the attention did not fade. If anything, it grew stronger. Someone clapped, encouraging her in a joking way. Someone else said, "Just a few notes." Her hands began to shake. She looked around, hoping someone would step in and stop it. No one did. Some watched with interest, others with smiles that suggested they expected failure. A few simply wanted entertainment. She felt small, exposed. Every reason she had ever told herself for staying quiet rushed back into her mind. This was why she stayed invisible. This was why she did not dream out loud. Still, something else stirred beneath the fear, a memory. Late nights, imaginary keys, silent practice in the dark, years of listening, absorbing, understanding. She swallowed hard. I really shouldn't, she said again, her voice barely steady. Someone shrugged. Suit yourself. But before the moment could pass, another person spoke, louder. Unless you're afraid. The word hung in the air. Afraid. She felt it settle deep inside her, touching something raw. She had been afraid her whole life. Afraid of being seen. Afraid of being judged. Afraid of proving everyone right. She took a slow breath. Without fully understanding why, she stepped forward. The room grew quieter. Some people leaned in. Others exchanged looks, already amused. She placed the tray down carefully and walked toward the piano. Each step felt heavy. Her legs wanted to stop, but she forced them forward. When she reached the bench, she hesitated. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished surface of the piano. For a brief moment, she almost turned away. Then she sat down. A few people chuckled softly. Someone whispered something she could not hear. She placed her hands on her lap and closed her eyes for just a second. She reminded herself of one thing. This was not about them. She lifted her hands and placed her fingers on the keys. The touch sent a small shock through her body. It felt real, solid, familiar, even after all this time. She breathed in slowly. The first notes came out quietly. Simple, careful. A few people smiled, clearly unimpressed. Someone shifted in their chair. She heard it, but she did not let it stop her. She continued. With each note, her shoulders relaxed a little. Her fingers remembered what her mind never forgot. The sound grew fuller, stronger. The rhythm settled. Conversations began to fade. She was no longer aware of the room the way she had been moments before. The piano became her world. Each key responded to her touch like it had been waiting. She did not rush. She did not show off. She played the way she felt, honest, open. A few people straightened in their seats. The laughter stopped. She kept going. Her fear slowly loosened its grip, replaced by something warmer. Confidence, not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that comes from truth. By the time she reached the middle of the piece, the room was completely silent. No whispers, no movement. Only music. She did not notice the change in faces. She did not see the raised eyebrows or the widened eyes. She did not hear the sharp intake of breath from someone in the back. She was too busy telling a story with her hands, and the story was only just beginning. The silence in the room felt heavy, but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that listened. Every ear leaned toward the sound coming from the piano. She could feel it without looking up. The air itself seemed to pause. Her fingers moved with more ease now. The stiffness from the first moments faded, replaced by a steady flow. She was no longer thinking about which key came next. Her hands already knew. Years of quiet practice, of listening and repeating in her mind, were finally finding their way out. She played with care, letting each note breathe. The melody rose and fell like a conversation, sometimes gentle, sometimes strong. It carried feeling, not just sound. It carried the kind of emotion that could not be taught from books. In the crowd, people shifted slowly, careful not to break the moment. A few leaned forward, elbows resting on their knees. Others sat back, eyes fixed on her hands. No one spoke. At the edge of the hall, someone who had been smiling earlier now stood still, their expression unreadable. Another person lowered their phone, forgetting to record. A woman who had been whispering to her friend earlier pressed her lips together, her eyes shining. She remained unaware of all of it. For her, the room had disappeared. There was only the piano and the story she was telling. A story made of moments she had lived, of nights filled with quiet longing, of days spent watching others from a distance, of hope she had never allowed herself to believe in. Her shoulders relaxed as she moved into a deeper part of the piece. The notes became fuller, richer. There was pain in them, but also warmth, loss, but also strength. It was not perfect in the technical sense, but it was real, and that was what made it powerful. Someone in the audience swallowed hard. The people who had laughed earlier now sat frozen. Their smiles had faded. A few exchanged glances, unsure of what to say or how to react. They had expected entertainment. They had expected something small. They were not prepared for this. As the music continued, memories surfaced for her. The first time she had touched a broken keyboard. The way her heart had raced when sound came out. The many times she had imagined this moment, never believing it would actually happen. Her hands trembled briefly during a difficult passage, but she did not stop. She adjusted, trusted herself, and moved forward. The small imperfection only made the moment more human, more honest. A man sitting close to the front closed his eyes. Another wiped his face quickly, hoping no one noticed. The music had reached a place deeper than skill. It had reached memory. She slowed slightly, letting the melody stretch. Each note hung in the air a fraction longer, as if refusing to disappear. The piano responded gently, faithfully. No one dared to interrupt. When she reached the final section, her breathing changed. She knew the end was coming. She felt a tightness in her chest, not from fear, but from the weight of what she was releasing. This was not just music anymore. This was everything she had held inside. Her fingers pressed the keys with purpose. The final notes were soft but steady, clear and true. Then, slowly, she lifted her hands. The sound faded. For a brief moment, nothing happened. The silence returned, thicker than before. It wrapped around the room like a held breath. She kept her head lowered, unsure of what to expect. Her heart pounded in her ears. Then someone stood. A single clap echoed through the hall. Another followed. Then another. Within seconds, the room filled with applause. Not polite applause. Not forced. Real applause. Strong and sincere. People stood up, clapping with energy they had not planned to give. She looked up slowly, her eyes wide. The sight in front of her did not feel real. Faces she had only seen from a distance were now turned fully toward her. Some smiled openly. Others looked stunned. A few looked ashamed. She stood up uncertainly, unsure of what to do with her hands. The applause continued. Someone near the back whistled softly in admiration. Her face burned. But this time it was not from embarrassment. It was disbelief. She gave a small, awkward nod, not trusting her voice. As the clapping finally softened, a quiet buzz filled the room. People whispered to each other, their words urgent and surprised. She was incredible. Where did she learn that? I've never heard it played like that. She stepped away from the piano slowly, as if afraid the moment would break if she moved too fast. The bench felt colder now that she was no longer sitting on it. Someone approached her, speaking gently, asking her where she had studied. She shook her head, unsure how to explain. Another person asked how long she had been playing. She hesitated, then answered honestly. By myself, she said quietly. The words seemed to surprise them more than the music. She felt exposed again. But this time it was different. The room no longer felt hostile. It felt curious, respectful. Still, doubt crept in. What if this was a one-time thing? What if tomorrow everything went back to the way it was? She had seen praise fade before. She had learned not to trust sudden kindness. As people continued to talk around her, she stepped aside, needing space to breathe. Her hands still tingled. Her heart had not slowed. She thought of the girl she had been that morning, walking into the building unnoticed. That version of herself felt far away now. But she also knew this was not the end. Something had shifted. Even if the world tried to forget her again, she would not forget this moment. She had crossed a line she could never step back from. Across the room, a few people watched her closely, not with judgment, but with interest. One of them spoke quietly to another, gesturing toward her. She did not hear the words. She only felt the change. For the first time in her life, she was no longer invisible, and the night was far from over. The applause slowly faded, but the energy in the room did not. It lingered, thick and restless, as if no one wanted to be the first to return to normal. People remained standing, looking at one another, unsure of what came next. She stood near the piano, her arms close to her body, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Someone nearby cleared their throat and said something about taking a short break. Chairs scraped softly against the floor as people began to move again. Conversations restarted, but they sounded different now, lower, more careful. Her name was still unknown to them, but her presence was no longer ignored. A few people approached her one by one. Their voices were gentle, respectful. They asked questions, not like before, not playful or teasing. They asked where she had learned, how long she had been playing, what pieces she liked. She answered honestly, keeping her words short. She did not know how to speak about herself like that. She had never needed to before. Some nodded slowly, as if trying to understand something that did not fit their expectations. Others smiled with open admiration. One person laughed softly and said they could not believe what they had heard. She smiled back, unsure how to respond. In the middle of it all, she felt a strange mix of emotions. Pride tried to rise, but fear followed closely behind. She worried the attention would vanish as quickly as it had appeared. She worried someone would point out what she lacked instead of what she had done. As the crowd spread out, she stepped back toward the wall, returning to a place that felt safer. From there, she watched people gather round the piano again, not to play this time, but to talk about what had just happened. She heard her music described in pieces, as if it belonged to the room now, not just to her. A few people who had laughed earlier avoided her eyes. One passed by and paused for a second, then said quietly, "You surprised everyone." The words sounded like an apology without saying it directly. She nodded and said nothing. Her hand still felt warm. She flexed her fingers slowly, grounding herself. The piano was silent now, but it felt closer than ever, like an old friend she had finally spoken to out loud. Not long after, someone important approached her. She could tell by the way others made space, the way conversation stopped mid-sentence. This person spoke calmly, asking if they could talk for a moment. She agreed, her heart beating faster. They stepped aside to a quieter corner. She listened carefully as questions were asked again, but this time with purpose. Not curiosity alone, but interest. She explained her background as best she could. She spoke about listening, watching, practicing whenever she could. She did not exaggerate. She did not hide anything either. The person nodded slowly, eyes thoughtful. They said her playing had something rare, something that could not be taught easily. They asked if she had ever considered performing publicly. The question startled her. She answered honestly, "I never thought it was possible." The person smiled gently and said many things seemed impossible until someone proved otherwise. They mentioned opportunities, not promises, but possibilities, lessons, guidance, a chance to be heard again. Her chest tightened. Hope stirred carefully, like something waking after a long sleep. She wanted to believe, but she had learned to be cautious with words after the conversation ended. She stood alone again, trying to steady herself. The room felt brighter somehow, or maybe she was seeing it differently now. As the evening continued, people treated her differently. Not everyone, but enough to notice. Doors were held open. Smiles came easier. A few people asked her to sit closer, to stay nearby. She did not know where she belonged anymore, so she stayed where she was later. When the event finally ended, the hall emptied slowly. The lights dimmed. The noise faded. She helped tidy up, moving through the space with quiet familiarity. But something had changed. She was no longer invisible while doing it. As she wiped the piano one last time, she paused. Her reflection stared back at her, clearer than before. She touched the edge gently, a small smile forming. When she stepped outside, the night air felt cool and sharp. The streetlights cast long shadows on the ground. She began the walk home alone, just like any other night. Yet every step felt lighter. Her mind replayed the music again and again. The silence, the applause, the looks on people's faces. She wondered what tomorrow would bring. Fear returned, but it no longer stood alone. Hope walked beside it. At home, she sat by the window, hands resting in her lap. The city sounds drifted in. She did not imagine music this time. She remembered it. For the first time, she allowed herself to think forward, not just survive the present. She did not know where the path led, but she knew she had taken the first step. Somewhere inside, a quiet promise formed. She would not hide again. The world had heard her once, and it was ready to hear more. Morning came softly, like it did not want to disturb her. Light slipped through the window and rested on the floor. She opened her eyes and lay still for a moment, listening to the city wake up. For the first time in a long while, she did not feel the heavy rush of worry the moment she woke. Instead, there was a quiet calm, mixed with curiosity. The night before felt distant, like a dream she was afraid might fade if she moved too quickly. She sat up slowly and let her feet touch the floor. Her hands rested in her lap. They looked the same as always, but she knew better now. These hands had spoken when her voice could not. She went through her routine again, but everything felt slightly different. The streets were the same. The people passed by without noticing her, just like before. Yet inside her, something had shifted. She was carrying proof of herself now, even if no one else could see it yet. When she reached the building, a few people looked up as she entered. Some smiled. One nodded. Small gestures, but they stayed with her. She returned them quietly and began her work. Later that day, she was asked to step aside for a moment. The request was polite, careful. Her heart beat faster as she followed into a small office she had never been invited into before. The same person from the night before was there, along with another who listened more than they spoke. They talked about what they had heard, about how rare it was to find someone who played with such honesty. They asked if she was willing to explore what came next. Not promises, just doors that could be opened. She listened closely, asking few questions. She did not want to pretend she understood more than she did. She admitted she was afraid of failing, afraid of leaving the life she knew. They did not dismiss her fear. They said fear was natural. They said growth usually came with it. When the conversation ended, she walked back into the hall slowly. The piano stood there, quiet and patient. She looked at it, not with longing this time, but with recognition. Days passed. She began attending lessons in borrowed rooms, using borrowed time. She learned the language she had only felt before, words for things she already understood in her hands, structure to support her instinct. It was not easy. Some days she felt behind, other days she felt stronger than she ever had. She kept working too. Life did not change all at once. She still cleaned floors, still stayed late, still returned home tired. But there was music waiting for her now, not just in her imagination. There were moments of doubt, nights when mistakes replayed in her mind, times when she wondered if the applause had been a mistake, if people would lose interest. But then she would sit at the piano and play, and the doubts would quiet. Weeks turned into months. Her confidence grew, not loudly, but steadily. She learned to stand straighter, to meet people's eyes, to speak when asked. One evening, she was invited to play again. This time, there was no laughter beforehand, no challenge disguised as a joke. People came to listen. She felt nervous, but it was a different kind of fear now. It was the fear of caring. She played. The room listened. When she finished, the applause felt warm, not shocking. She accepted it with a small smile, breathing deeply. She understood now that moments like these were not gifts to be begged for. They were earned, one honest note at a time. Word spread slowly, not loudly, not through headlines or fame, but through people telling other people, through quiet recommendations, through moments that stayed with listeners. She was no longer invisible. She did not forget where she came from. She still noticed those who stood at the edges of rooms, those who watched silently. She treated them kindly, because she knew the weight of being unseen. One afternoon, she saw a young girl standing near the piano, watching the way she once had. The girl's eyes were wide, full of wonder and fear. She caught the girl looking away quickly when noticed. She smiled at her later. She invited the girl closer and showed her a few notes. Nothing complicated, just enough to open a door. The girl's smile reminded her of something important. This was never just about proving people wrong. It was about proving herself right. Time continued to move. Opportunities came and went. Some led somewhere, others did not. She learned that disappointment was part of the path too. But it no longer stopped her. One night, after another small performance, she walked home under familiar streetlights. The city felt quieter than usual. She paused for a moment. Looking up at the sky, she thought about the girl she used to be. The one who stood near walls and listened. The one who believed silence was safety. She thanked her quietly. Because without that girl, she would not be here. Her life was not perfect. It was not easy, but it was hers. And every time her fingers touched the keys, she remembered the moment everything changed, the moment they mocked her, and the moment she played anyway.